Wednesday, the 6th of July. We're all very saddened to learn this morning of the passing away of Mohammed Barkindo, the Secretary General of OPEC, who died quite suddenly and unexpectedly last night, just a few days ahead of completing his tenure at OPEC, 6 years in. I always found him an erudite and thoughtful man who certainly devoted himself to the affairs of OPEC in his 6 years there. And this included some of the most serious crises situations in the organization's history. So I think it's right to pass our deepest condolences to his family, friends, and his colleagues at OPEC. Perhaps I could ask Narendra Taneja, India's leading energy expert, who has had many dealings with Mohammed Barkindo over the years, to give us some sort of view on the man and his tenure at OPEC. Narendra, if you could.
Yes, Frank, thanks for this opportunity. In fact, I had met him quite a few times and in different capitals and conferences, and always found him very warm, always ready to have good quality conversation and give his time. And we from New Delhi, we looked upon, he was always looked upon as a friend, as a voice of the global South, a person that a big importer of oil like India could easily communicate with. And so majority of people here in New Delhi would, have to deal with OPEC as part of their job. Always found him very, very friendly. In fact, very often I heard from officials here that they could actually call, even land up in Vienna when he was available. He was available in the sense he would immediately give time and give as much time as wanted. And so he was one person, though he was OPEC, and OPEC means very often troubles for us since we are a large importer. Our dependence on imports is very, very high. Whenever they take decisions to push up the prices, of course, that, is never received as a good news here in Delhi. But at the same time, he was one person who was always looked upon OPEC, but at the same time known OPEC more as a representative of the global South, the person who was ready to listen, person who was very sensitive, person who understood our constraints, our problems and issues. So my deep condolences to his family, to his friends and his colleagues, and many of them actually are his friends in New Delhi.
Thank you. Ole Hansen, Head of Commodity Strategy at Saxo Bank, based in Denmark. Just give us a quick European view, if you could, Ole, on Mohammed Barkindo and his time at OPEC.
Well, basically that he's been at the helm during a very, very challenging time for OPEC and the OPEC Plus corporation, which was initiated during his tenure. So a lot of respect. Always had the feeling of his deep knowledge about the market, and obviously his ability as well to navigate a group, an organization which, as I said, has been very challenged throughout this time. The collapse in 2020, the subsequent actions to stabilize the market, and then managing to hold the group together throughout these latest, especially very tricky months that we've seen. So a lot of respect and condolences to him and to his family.
Okay, just to complete the global picture, Victor Yang, Senior Editor, JLC Network Technology in China. Victor, what was the view of the man in that part of the world?
Yes, well, I haven't met him in person, but I had a lot of respect for him too. And as Oli said, he took the organization in a very difficult time and has been through a lot of difficulties as well. And so I offer my condolences here to him and his family too. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let's get down to normal business. So oil markets took quite a hit yesterday with a 10% fall in Brent. It steadied a bit today, now at around $104 a barrel. WTI just below the $100 mark still when I last looked at it. And the main reason seems to be heightened fears about a global economic recession. But it still isn't crystal clear whether the supply side or demand is driving this. JP Morgan earlier this week said that that oil could hit a stratospheric $380 a barrel in a worst case scenario for Russian supply. Citibank countered yesterday with a figure of $65 a barrel that they thought was far more likely as those recession fears worsened. Let's go first to Ole in Denmark. And Ole, I think just a short time ago, there was a broad consensus that oil prices will continue to rise for the rest of this year, but that doesn't seem to be happening. Why is this? And are recent falls confirmation that we've reached demand destruction levels now?
I think the last part of the question is the answer to that is yes, because we have seen in recent months how even though crude oil has been relatively stable in a range here between 100 and 120, we've seen this surge in distillate fuel products, gasoline and diesel. The price for those have hit the levels that you could clearly indicate that some constraint is starting to emerge among consumers, but generally, this market is in a flux right now. It's just as the whole market. I mean, this is turning out to be the most difficult trading year, difficult year to traders, for investors, to consumers to understand and to navigate through. And the oil market is obviously in the center of this. And whether we've seen the peak. I think we may have seen the peak, but I think it's much too early to call a cessation of this strength that we're seeing, because the underlying supply issues remains, and they potentially could get even worse over the coming months. So I think this is just what oil do best is just to upset the narrative, and it's very much taking place right now, and it's taking place across all sectors. Industrial metals taking a massive hit. Agricultural commodities, luckily, I would say, thankfully, it's trading quite a bit low as well. But generally, this is a clear out. We are into the silly season. Liquidity is low. People are going on holiday. They're reducing exposure instead of adding, and that's just all adding to the equation where technical traders, they have the upper hand right now.
Okay, I was about to make the point, which you preempted me there by saying that it is, right across the board in commodities, isn't it? So give me some sort of view as to what's happening there, and especially with regard to your big neighbor, Germany, where all sorts of dire forecasts and projections are coming out. Some industrialists saying that whole sectors, whole swathes of German industry will be forced to close. Give me an instant snapshot there, please, Ole.
Well, just from the helicopter perspective, it all really started to turn south, downhill early June. The very strong inflation print from the US, followed by the aggressive rate hike the following week from the FOMC, basically kicked off this whole recession angst that has been driving the markets since. And obviously, commodities being dependent on demand has been caught in the middle of this. And during this time, the supply side, which is also structurally challenged over the coming years, has been a little bit been put aside. So that's, and if we add to that the lockdowns in China, which now have been going on for much longer than the market had anticipated, it really is becoming a major issue with China's growth is really bumping along at very low levels right now. That is the main reason why industrial metals has taken a major hit. We're down to, I would say, more than a year low. I think around a 14 months low now in something like copper, which is the bellwether. But turning to Europe, we're caught in the middle of this energy crisis, and with oil price at 100 this morning or 105. That's really not the focus. It's on the distillates, which are still elevated, and that's the gas price, as you mentioned.
Okay.
But German economy, just to highlight, it is very export driven. It is driven by commodity intensive export. It's chemicals, it's machineries, it's cars. This all takes energy to produce, and with gas prices at current levels, yes, we are seeing trouble starting to emerge in Germany, and that the risk of that is obviously recession, and that's why the euro-dollar is at the lowest level in 20 years, and that's really what was the trigger yesterday for the additional weakness, the strength we saw in the dollar.
Okay, we'll talk more about Europe later in the broadcast. You mentioned China there, so just let me go straight to Victor Yang in Guangzhou. Hi, Victor. Give us the latest, please, if you would, on the new outbreaks that we've seen of COVID in various parts, including Shanghai and elsewhere. Will the zero COVID policy kick in again, and will that lead to new lockdowns and shortages, as has been the policy in the past?
Well, the dynamic zero policy has been here all the time. And the difference is that the country has actually eased its restriction to some degree. Say, for instance, as from June 29th, the government will no longer identify people from cities with a few cases. Say, in the past, if you are from Guangzhou and Guangzhou reported several cases on a daily basis, even you are from a district without any cases, you will be marked on your phone that you're from a high risk or medium risk region.
Okay.
So this will cause you a lot of inconvenience. But as from June 29th, this would be canceled. So this is kind of the improvement. And now, yes, we have a few dozen new cases on a daily basis now, and mostly in Anhui province. As for Shanghai, it's just 2 cases yesterday. So
just 2?
It's no surprise. Yeah,
right.
In Shanghai, I mean, it's no surprise that we had a few cases in Shanghai because, well, it's not completely well out of the wood yet. And in Beijing too, there are several cases too. So there are still a few regions reporting some cases on a daily basis. But this doesn't mean the lockdown of the whole city again. The government is now trying to avoid such lockdown, saying if a community reports new cases, this community can be locked down, but not the whole city.
I see.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
So
different.
That's a weakening of the zero COVID policy then.
Yes, you can say that. You can say that.
Haven't you had some worries or fears about weather conditions as well recently?
Yes, well, we have been experiencing more rain than before this summer. Say, just in late June, Guangdong, say Guangzhou, Qingyuan, and several cities in Guangdong province and some cities in Guangxi and even in Hunan were flooded for days. And this torrential rain has been expanded to northern regions now. And from today to tomorrow, over 10 provinces are expecting torrential rain. So
right.
It has become a great concern. I mean, the damage to the economy of the floods this summer, yes, it can be a great concern. Yes.
Okay, right. Well, there we are, global warming and its immediate impact.
Yes.
Narendra, one global economy that has so far proven resilient to the general global malaise is India. And I'm wondering what your latest economic forecasts are for the country. And tell me bluntly, how is India managing to swim against the global tide? There is recession everywhere else, but India seems to be sailing through. How is it doing that?
Well, the simple one-line answer is that, a huge domestic market and proactive government, both at the level of the center, also many various states, and also, of course, even the central bank. So that the result is what it is. But you are absolutely right. I mean, India is truly the fastest growing large economy in the world, and the future projections, whether you go by IMF or you go by several international organizations, both private and intergovernmental, projections are pretty good. So therefore, I mean, when you go around the country, of course, we are still battling with COVID. It's not a big problem, but it's still there, it's still very much around. And we are, of course, battling also with high crude oil prices, which has a huge impact on, fiscal deficit and value of rupee and so on and so forth. But at the same time, when you look at the overall sentiments across the country from north to south, east to west, sentiments are very strong. Everybody is talking about growth. We can look at the broad indicators. They are very, very impressive. And at the same time, whether you're a small corporation, a big corporation, or a multinational operating in India, you're basically planning for next 5 years and 10 years and so on and so forth. So I think the sentiments are very, very good. And that's what I'm saying, that, of course, the biggest concern when you talk with policymakers and the consumers alike is that about the oil prices. When we saw JP Morgan report, of course, there were many who were worried, but people like me who understand the sector a bit, we just dismissed it. I dismissed it. And
really?
So I also dismissed Citibank report. Yes, Citibank also. I don't think it's going to go down to 65. But our estimates, when I come to our policymakers and the other players, is that probably crude oil prices are going to be in the range of $95 to $115 immediate, I'm talking immediate future, next 3-4 months. But medium term and long term, I think we are preparing for higher crude prices. And at the same time, we are also looking at how now so far we have all experienced only one global market for oil, but it looks like after G7 decision in Munich, probably we're going to see the emergence of an alternative market or a parallel market, call it by any name, led by Russia and supported by China. So we don't know. Well, so we are looking at all this with a lot of curiosity.
Tell me more about that, Narendra, because India has been able to benefit from cheaper Russian oil imports. How big a factor is that? How large a proportion of total imports are now coming from Russia to India?
Well, very good question. Not cheap oil, probably the right word would be discounted, slightly discounted. And so we roughly consume 5 million barrels of oil every day, crude every day. And the latest figures are we imported 1.2 million barrels last month, which means that, until recently, Saudi Arabia was the biggest exporter to India. And 4 months ago, it was the United States. And today, we look at the data, the latest data available, Russia is the biggest exporter of crude oil to India. So, that's the change. Whether it's sustainable or not, we don't know. Much of that oil had come from high seas on all these ULCCs and VLCCs, which were floating around with Russian oil, and people, consumers, in refiners bought it from the high seas. We don't know whether that's going to be the situation tomorrow. We know there's constraint in terms of oil tankers. Russia doesn't have a very large fleet of tankers, and we don't have that either. So which means we'll have to depend on third-party tankers, and majority of these tankers are with Western companies. Insurance is an issue, and passage is an issue via Turkey, and so on and so forth. So there are many challenges. We don't know whether it's sustainable, but yes, discounted oil, at least for 6-7 weeks, we enjoyed that benefit. And that has made a little difference in terms of our import bill. Not much. If we look at our import bill, which was about $121 billion for the last fiscal, but this year is going to go up because the prices have stayed where they've stayed. But we are very curious to see whether this parallel crude oil market actually takes any formal shape, led by Russia, supported by China, and some other. We don't know that. But it looks like after the Munich G7 decisions, with further tightening of sanctions against Russia, in a way of weaponizing oil even further, I think it's a bad news for big importers like India. And therefore, we are looking at the Russia with a lot of curiosity. Is Russia capable? Is it sophisticated enough to kind of, to create this parallel market? Is China going to kind of come out openly and support the parallel market? Are there other beneficiaries? A small country like Sri Lanka would join that or not. We don't know yet, but we are looking at with tremendous curiosity. If that happens, or crude oil prices actually will come down. That's our rough estimate at this stage.
Victor, what do you think? Will China support this parallel market that Narendra sees coming? Maybe.
Well, and we are not seeing rapid growth in the country's crude run yet or demand yet. Well, say for now, independence operating rates are now only about 4 to 5% below the year-ago level. But state-owned refiners operating rates are about 12% below the year-ago level.
Right.
And independent refiners are actually benefiting from discounted crude. And at the beginning, they shy away from the purchase of Russian crude, say immediately after the sanctions were announced on Russian crude. But after a while of waiting, they purchase more Russian crude. So this is not the case. They purchase more Russian crude than state-owned refiners now. And this has kind of supported the run rates quite significantly. because well, if they buy regular crude, their margins will be terrible now for this moment. But with this discounted crude, their margins are much better. So they had their run rates quite close to the year-ago level now, and this would continue for some months at least, say at least weeks or even months as well. But state-owned refineries run rates are not expecting to go up much yet. Say Sinopec shut down 2 refineries, large ones, in the second half of June. One is Shanghai Petrochemical, as you may have heard of, and the other one is Maming Petrochemical. Both were hit by accidents. Say Maming Petrochemical was hit by a fire in early June, and Shanghai Petrochemical on June 18th. So Sinopec's been hit by a series of accidents this year. So it stepped up refinery inspection after the Shanghai accident and shut down the refinery and Shanghai Petrochemical. The 2 refineries had the combined refining capacity of 680,000 barrels per day. So 2 quite large ones. And yes, so we're not expecting yet.
Ole, let me go back to you because one of the big debates of recent weeks has been about spare capacity in the oil market, OPEC, Saudi Arabia, and UAE in particular. One publication went so far as to suggest just yesterday, I believe, that Saudi Arabia has been telling untruths for decades about its capacity and even its reserves. I wouldn't expect you to address that. But what's your view? How high can Saudi Arabia go for how long, perhaps in response to calls that we may see from President Biden in his forthcoming visit to the kingdom? How much can Saudi Arabia pump?
Well, let's hope, first of all, that the fact that Saudi Arabia has been flatlined now around 10.5 million barrels for the past couple of months is basically just a preparation for the Biden visit, so they can ramp up production back to their target, because they've been producing below their OPEC plus quota now for the past 2 months, according to the surveys I'm seeing. I hope that is potentially a little bit of a preparation to add some extra barrels as an appeasement to Biden when he arrives. If not, it highlights Saudi Arabia, just like most other producers, that they are struggling to increase production right now. We are seeing this deficit from the OPEC plus members relatively to how the target that they have agreed is now running in the region of 2.7 million barrels a day. OPEC accounting for around 1.6 million of that. Excuse me. And considering Russia is probably going to see even lower production over the coming months, the market will remain very tight. So whether Saudi Arabia can get back up to 12 million barrels, I mean, that has to be a big question mark on that. And we have only seen that kind of production level, I believe, once. So it may be a tall order. So let's say from a supply security perspective, I do hope that the flattening of the production over the last couple of months is just in preparation for a ramp up once we get the Biden visit out of the way.
Okay, you think that might be deliberate, but Narendra, even if that is the case, and Saudi Arabia can significantly increase, perhaps in response to Biden requests, does that make any difference to the overall global picture?
Well, Frank, I mean, good question. Saudi Arabia is a very, very smart country when it comes to oil diplomacy, or playing in the market. Abu Dhabi is also very, very smart. I'm not so sure about Iraq, even Kuwait to some extent. But Saudi Arabia, I think my sense is very, very strong. They're very smart, and they're going to play this game very well. Like, one of the reasons, my own view is that, one of the reasons that oil prices have come down a bit, and they might continue to be, on the southern slope before President Biden comes to Riyadh. I mean, that's a way Saudi Arabia is also conveying to the United States the kind of role that they are capable of playing in terms of energy markets and oil markets in particular. So, and this year, we all know that President Biden's party is facing elections to Congress, and it's important for President Biden to win that election so that he can secure his own 2024. I mean, Saudi Arabia knows it very well. So it's going to be a lot of, a big game between Saudi Arabia on one hand, the United States on the other, and also other Western democracies. So, but my sense is that, when it comes to, tightening of sanctions against Russia, with maybe minimum at least 3 to 3.5 million of barrels of oil, entering into a difficult zone means that it may not completely disappear, but big importers like India would probably be struggling to secure supplies of Russian oil, because Russia, if there are sanctions against anyone and everyone who imports Russian oil, I think that India will have to take a call, and which might be a very different call, like we did in the case of Iran. We don't import a drop of oil from Iran. We are very close to the West, very close to the United States. The United States is a strategic partner for us. But at the same time, we have been buying Russian oil because good economics, no other reason. That is not for any love for Russia, it's just economics. Now, going back to your point of Saudi Arabia, I think this will continue. And my own sense is that Saudi Arabia probably has an extra capacity, maybe 1.2 million barrels, maybe 1.5 million barrels. And maybe, Iraq can chip in, Abu Dhabi can chip in, but would that be sufficient to replace, the oil, the Russian oil that will eventually disappear from the market one way or another? So I think it's going to be very, very tough. And that's why you have projections like from JP Morgan and that's highly exaggerated, and that's why, policymakers in cities like in a country like India having sleepless nights. We know for sure that oil is not going to come down to a level that we can celebrate. For us, we need oil $70 per barrel. Any dollar more than that is actually bad news for our economy. And we are an important player on the global economic landscape. So if India suffers, the entire world suffers in a way. So my sense, but this is going to be tough. The decision to weaponize oil, decision to sanction Russian oil was a strategic mistake. Russia, I'm sure, is paying the price, but more than Russia, Western Europe is paying the price. Germany is paying the price. American consumers are paying the price. I think sanctions are fine, but they should have kept oil and gas out of the sanction so that, that probably would not have created the kind of, havoc which is created across the world, especially for energy poor. By the way, Frank, there are 3 billion energy poor on this planet, 3 billion, including, sure, at least close to 2 billion in Asia alone. Then you have Africa, Latin America. So, I mean, I don't know. My view is going to be tough time ahead. It's not going to be that easy.
That's interesting because you're saying that sanctions were a strategic error, but at the same time, you seem to be hinting earlier that you would make a call and you would probably go with the West. Is that right?
Well, if, for instance, I mean, if Western Europe, NATO, and other democracies like Japan, they join the sanctions or they support the sanctions, and we are compelled to make a choice between Russian oil versus our strategic relations with the West. Of course, chances are we're going to go with the West because the West is very important for us. We are a democracy. We are culturally, ideologically, politically, we are like a Western country. And so we would like to protect our good relations with the West and the United States, Japan, Australia, all these democracies. Democracies are very, very important for us. So if we are forced to make a choice, I think it's not going to be that difficult to make one.
Okay. We are running out of time. I would like to stay on the subject of weaponizing energy and bring up the survey question, if I could, which is talking to this. So our survey question today, which is actually July the 6th, is there are fears that Russia will cut off gas supplies altogether to Europe over the coming months, and that this will test the unity of European countries in their response to the invasion of Ukraine. So I'm offering you a single choice in response to that. Putin will, 1, pull back from the ultimate threat to freeze Europe this winter, or 2, European leaders will weaken in their resolve to confront him with sanctions over the Ukrainian invasion. Which do you think is more likely? So let me ask Ole regarding that question. There was a very good piece in The Economist at the end of last week, which seemed to argue that time was on Putin's side with regard to Ukraine, and that European leaders would soon be clamoring for concessions by President Zelensky to head off a winter energy crisis. How do you see that in Europe? Can European unity continue to hold?
Gosh, it's a very good question. I think there is a risk that we may see some weakened in the resolve because of the economic impact that's being felt now widely across the region. But at the same time, I think also there is the feel like that we have to make a stance against Russian aggression, and obviously if we step back on this, then we are looking at the smaller Baltic states next as being in the firing line. So I think with that in mind, I think the result will remain. It will come at a very, very high cost, but then I think it is a cost worth paying at this point. So with regards to Russian cutting gas, obviously they are getting revenues, very strong revenues right now on the gas they are selling, and also on their oil revenues. Gas is not easy to divert to other regions, so I think they would like to still continue to supply gas. So cutting off completely is not my base case scenario.
No, but they seem to be waving this stick, don't they? Narendra, what do you think? Will the Europeans find some backbone here?
My sense is it's going to be very tough for the Europeans. I mean, this winter, you will see the moment winter starts and people are, forced to ration, for instance, hot water in their tap and so on and so forth, and gas supplies, and then the public opinion might begin to change, in the sense that not necessarily so much against what the government decisions, but when you are forced to make these tough choices, very often you think quite differently. So my sense is, as I said, that probably the sanctions might still continue, but probably the West may kind of let Russian oil and gas continue to flow into global market. I mean, you can continue with the sanction, but when you ignore the supply, you can ignore those people who still are buying. I think that's probably a more pragmatic approach, so that you can deal with Russia over Ukraine and and pursue your political agenda, and at the same time you don't damage your own self, your own economy. So I think let the sanctions continue, that you like, but you don't want to exempt oil and gas formally, but let Russian oil gas continue to flow into global markets as usual, so that you have your political agenda, and at the same time the consumers have access to what they need in terms of oil and gas. I think you got to be pragmatic, right? Father, I don't think the decision to sanction oil and gas was carefully thought through. A decision was taken by those politicians who probably don't understand oil and gas. They took that decision. Now they don't know what to do with it. So they should let it continue to flow. Continue with your sanction. Tighten the sanctions further if you prefer. But as far as the supply is concerned, let gas continue to flow into Europe, into global market. Let oil continue to flow into global supply. I think that would be a smart thing to do on the part of America and Europe and other countries who are basically very keen on that. But I think what Russia did was wrong. That is understandable. But at the same time, don't punish everybody. Why are you punishing an oil consumer in Indonesia or in India or Ghana? And why are you doing that? In oil price today, there is at least $25 Ukraine premium. We are developing, we are paying that premium. Why should we be paying the price for a decision taken in Washington, D.C.? That's a basic question.
Okay, let's get the survey result, please, can we? And see what the room thinks. Well, split down the middle, really. It's going to be a test, isn't it? I'm not so sure that Putin wants to lose the revenue, but on the other hand, he does want to intimidate the rest of Europe. I think that's pretty clear. So we'll see how that plays out. We've reached the end of our time today. So I'm grateful to you all, to Ole, to Narendra, to Victor. On a sad day because of the passing of Mohammed Barkindo, and once again condolences to his family, friends, and his colleagues at OPEC. But thank you very much, the three of you, for taking part. I'm sure we'll see you again next week. Thank you.
Thank you.